Goodness me. That's Thank you, Toka. So we're at a product management festival. You probably think I talk about innovation or users, customers. But the thing that as Toka said, that I think that we don't spend enough time talking about is culture. And how that culture manifests in the products that you all build, regardless of what level, what size of company, what stage of company you're in. Do I have to open up the slide or? Okay, sorry. After multiple years and multiple talks, I don't think I've ever seen the AV thing work just with a click of a button. So culture. Let's start with the three-legged stool. How many people have heard about the three-legged stool? Hands up. Okay, a lot of hands down, so I'll tell you what that is. The best analogy that describes the partnership that you need to have in building products across product management, engineering, and UX, and that includes design, UX research, is the stool. So without one of those legs, the stool just doesn't stay up. So think about that when you go back to, your teams. And so what I want to leave you with, and if there's one thing you take away from this talk, it's an analogy similar to the three-legged stool, maybe a bit more fun. You're invited to a party, and it's post-pandemic, so you actually have to be at the party. And you're Dutch. I live in the Netherlands. I'm not Dutch, but if you were Dutch, what time would you arrive at this party? The average Dutch person probably would show up before 7 o'clock. I've even had 30 minutes before 7 o'clock. I'm like, please stay in your house. I lived in France. If you were French, especially Parisian, and you were invited to a party, 7 o'clock, what time do you show up? The average, you have to arrive at least 15 minutes after the time. Any earlier, and it's just rude. The host needs time to, get ready for the party. And then you're Nigerian. I'm trying to see if there are any Nigerians in the room, and you're invited to that 7 o'clock party. I heard someone say 8. You might be Nigerian, because that is exactly when we would show up, probably even at 9 o'clock, right? So you don't know where this party is, you don't know, who's hosting the party, but you all had some idea. And if you're Swiss, I like to think of the Swiss as precision. I think they probably will arrive at 7, like 0000, like on the dot. So now you have these 3 people invited to a party. What time should they arrive? Is it the individual's perception of the time they should arrive? Is it the host they're coming to? Oh, it's a Nigerian party, so you better not show up at 7. Nothing will be ready. Or is it a Dutch party? If I show up 10 minutes late, that's kind of rude. Or is it the country they're in? And that's kind of what I want to leave you with today, right? We all are individuals. We all have some company we work in. We all have some context we work in. And, we like to think of product management as having a party. So how would you think about the implication of this? And this is really distilling culture. It's these customs, ideas, behaviors of a particular group of people. And you can see that scale, individual, micro, macro. And so what I want to kind of leave you with today is to ask yourself the question, and the question that I continue to ask myself, is what culture am I in, and how does this culture empower me? So Toka mentioned I've been very fortunate to work for 3 companies that probably most of you use in a typical day, right? And as a product manager, that's, I think of it as quite a privilege. You see products from a startup's perspective and the sort of monolithic culture we had, and I will tell the story about that. The culture of Netflix, which very much manifests in the product that you use. And this is a culture that really crystallized an approach to the culture and was very intentional about that. And then at YouTube, where I am today, which is part of Google, and a culture that's at scale, crazy scale. And so as I go through this presentation, and I'm a storyteller, I think one of the most powerful skills of a product manager is storytelling. I want you to ask yourself this question. For your company, your team, how does this culture empower me? So let's start with Uber. You've probably all heard the story. They were in Paris, probably going late to a party. And our founders were thinking about how to get a taxi. Very difficult. The vision of push a button, get a ride, came from that. And at the heart of Uber was this notion of demand and supply, a marketplace. And the future was it could be food or cars or whatever, but push a button, get a ride. And so there's this quote that I particularly love. A lot of people, so one of the other talks I give is on strategy, a lot of people don't know what strategy is. I know that's a very bold statement, right? But if you don't know what strategy is, that's fine. Fix the culture, the strategy will follow. And this is exactly what Uber did, right? So you had hundreds and hundreds of cities. And in all of those cities, you have this culmination of the human technology, right? And an actual physical car. And so all of this comes together and a car shows up. It's very sort of, today. But at the time, this was mind-blowing. It was like magic. And what you had to do in the city was take one of those values, which is celebrate cities, and bring that to life in your city. Whether it's from policy and regulations, getting drivers' cars. In some countries, they can easily get a car. In other countries, it takes them 10 years to save for a car, right? In some countries, you have data that covers everywhere. In some countries, it just drops off. And so you had to bring that to life, and that's what we call always be hustling. There were days when I would roll up my sleeves, wear, well, actually no sleeves, Uber t-shirt, go out into the street and actually try to what we call slang drivers, convincing them to join Uber. And we used to say you could go from the streets to the boardroom. The culture was basically do what you have to do to make magic and bring that push a button, get a ride to life. And that manifested in the products we built, that manifested in the tools we gave teams in countries. And as we sort of carried on, one of the things we kept seeing was we would work on that supply, right? And very important that you sort of listen to that. I'm referring to humans as supply, so you'll see how that comes through later. You work on that supply, and then you work on the demand, and then it comes together and you get what we call marketplace liquidity. So working on all of this supply, working on all this demand, and we look at the numbers. Uber is a very data-centric business, right? A few of the early folks came from GE, so it was all about the numbers, all about the three-letter acronyms, which nobody ever knows what they mean. And we basically would look at these numbers, and you'd see this massive, steep drop-off in a lot of countries. Because worldwide, 1 in 4 people, on average, have a card. And our vision was push a button, get a ride. And on the website, we'd actually say a cashless experience. You end the trip, and you just walk out of the car, right? But that didn't scale. We also had another thing we talked about, transportation as reliable as running water. In my country, water's not reliable. So that didn't scale either. And so with this sort of thinking, we went back to the values. What do we need in these markets to actually unlock that demand? And it was cash. Most people pay by cash. And so if the vision is push a button, get a ride, reliable transport everywhere and for everyone, we did evolve it from reliable water. By not offering cash, you're basically offering a product to some people and some places. And the PM at the time, I'll use a sort of, not a senior manager, the level just before senior manager, right? That PM basically said, well, no, we're not celebrating cities, and we're not making magic. When I open up the app and I can't push a button and get a ride, it's not magic. And Travis, the CEO, was vehemently against cash. He was like, no way, it's a cashless experience. But The culture said, let builders build. And so we launched Cash against all pushback from every single exec, mostly in Silicon Valley, with no idea of this concept of people not having credit cards. And we launched a very, very hacky product, right? In the very Uber spirit of just, go fast, get the product out there, learn. And Cash became this really magical thing. You're seeing the experience the driver looks at. There's a lot steeped into that product from actually speaking to the customers, because again, celebrate cities. Things like the denominators, things like change, things like an illiterate driver who actually can't do a lot with numbers, so how do you use color to indicate certain things? And I think this product really is the culmination of a cultural value that allowed the magic of the product. The black line you see is basically Uber 2016 and the growth rate. 2016, we were huge. We had raised $1 billion. So that black line is exponential. The green line, which looks exponential, is the growth that we had from launching Cash. 6 out of 10 customers would never have experienced the magic of Uber if not for Cash. And Cash would not have happened if we didn't have a cultural value that pushed against the executives. So this is how culture very directly impacts product. Uber's growing, we've raised a lot of money, we're super pumped. I don't know if you noticed that on the slide, that was actually a cultural value. Everyone's excited, and the company is scaling. The thing with culture is, it is basically the good behaviors that you reward and the bad behaviors that you tolerate. And you always have both. And we were scaling, and we had a lot of this sort of let builders build, principled confrontation, meritocracy and toe-stepping. And there were a lot of things that happened within the company that were tolerated. So I go back to demand and supply. And we're growing as a company, but what we also see is balancing that marketplace is really the heart of one of Uber's amazing products, search. So whenever supply and demand are out of balance, basic economics, you correct that. You increase the price, and so the demand corrects itself, or you entice supply to come on the road. But in markets, what we call driver operations, DOPS, could go into a tool and turn off search. So let's say there's a protest, or there's a massive accident. There's nuance in the country, so we built all these products that allowed the DOPS override the system. So lots of bad behaviors that were tolerated. And in 2017, if you ever meet anyone at Uber who's around for a while, just say 2017 and give them a hug. It was a very difficult year. We had a CEO that had been invited to the advisory board for the then president of America. That president was Trump, and that's all I will say on that matter. And so a business that had been thinking about data, where we had cut prices, where we were looking at these numbers, we'd look at these algorithms, and it would tell us, yep, you can reduce the price by this, and it would stimulate more growth, and it always worked. But that's not how humans work. Humans are not supply, right? It's not something you just dial up on a nod, but that's how we thought about it. And so Trump bans a few countries coming into the US, heartbreaking, and taxi drivers around JFK were protesting. Protest means you have blocked streets, you have a lot of demand, search starts going up, and this DOPS, driver operations in New York, taking on the sort of let builders build, I'm going to go off and do the right thing, switched off search. In theory, that sounds logical. We don't want to make money off a situation that basically is about a protest. But that's not how the world saw it. It looked like Uber had turned off search because we were trying to compete with taxis. And because we had behaviors over and over that had been tolerated, everyone believed that. Imagine waking up and seeing that 400,000 customers have deleted your app. Not because you did something bad. You did something good, but they didn't believe it. Right? And so this is 2017, and that growth and that success sometimes hides the rot. And it sometimes allows these behaviors to continue. And that continued to escalate. Eventually, the CEO resigned. Like product, somebody making a decision, that DOps was not fired, he did the right thing. But the implication of the culture not evolving is that the CEO literally lost the job of the company he built. And so the takeaway for me here is, if you don't evolve a culture, it will evolve itself, whether you like it or not. It could be in your team, it could be in a company, it could be at scale. And there are sometimes people, it used to be this way, once upon a time. Actually, companies have to evolve. And so these are the new cultural norms at Uber. I think the most important one is the last one, which is do the right thing, period. And the right thing is contextual. So monolithic culture, startup, led to a ton of success. No one ever took a step back to say, let's evolve this culture. And the result was a very chaotic year, and then the evolution that came after. Culture is a living system. It's made up of people, humans, and so it evolves, right? It does not remain static. And so I want you to keep thinking about that, both in the company you're in, the teams you're in. Are we evolving the culture? So moving on to Netflix. This is an example of a culture that continues to evolve. And if I could summarize Netflix culture in one word, it would be no rules, rules. How many people have read the book? Fantastic. Okay. So in 2009, Reed Hastings published this 127-page culture memo. If you have not read it, I think it's probably one of the most important documents of Silicon Valley. And I always say, I do a lot of startup advisory. If there is one culture I could bottle and just give everyone to drink, it would be the Netflix culture. Because somehow it has managed to continue to evolve and still be truly Netflix. And it shows in the products. So you've got online streaming, which came from DVDs. You now have gaming. When I joined Netflix, one of what we called strategic bets was, we will never do ads. Netflix just launched ads a couple of weeks ago, right? And this actually comes back into the culture. So if you were to sort of crystallize that 127-page document, it really came down to seeking excellence. And when I discovered the Netflix culture, I was actually at Uber. My product marketing counterpart had a wife that was at Netflix, and I was trying to create a culture within my team. And he said, have you read this 127-page doc? And I said, no, 127 pages, Jesus Christ, summarize. I read the doc, all 127 pages, and it really changed my philosophy to leadership, intentionally. And it's really this thing of seeking excellence. If you're a manager, if you're a PM working with other engineers, other disciplines, something that probably will come to your mind is, how do I get people to just be as excited about this? And it's not about promos, and it's not about performance reviews. It's just because I want to build a magical product. And that's what I wanted. Like, how do I get people to be always seeking excellence without having to sort of dangle a carrot? How do you do that? It's like the nirvana. But this is what Netflix basically has done. And this 3-part cycle, and by the way, you cannot just take Netflix culture and transpose it into your company. It does require steps. But these 3-part sort of cycle is basically what Netflix does. So one is talent density. If everyone in the room earned their seat, you've been in those meetings where there's that one person that always has something to say and probably should just not have said anything, right? Imagine being in a room where that never happens, where every single person is pushing you, is making the product better, genuinely wants you to realize your excellence. This is basically what Netflix has done. So you have, to do that, you do talent density, right? Football teams, basketball teams, you get the best of the best within whatever you can afford, right? And you make sure that you pay top of market. There is no bonus that Michael Jordan got for like shooting hoops, right? There's no bonus that Lewis Hamilton gets for winning a race. You just do it because you care about winning, because you have a championship mindset. So if you have a high talent density, get rid of promos, get rid of perf. By the way, for all the Googlers in the room, that is not what I'm proposing. But this is what Netflix did. If you have a superstar team, an Olympic team, we don't need to give them performance reviews or promotions or bonuses. You just do it whatever you need to, and you pay them top of market, because people will do the best all the time. And so with talent density means you can now have radical candor. If you go away from feedback being something that, is like an attack, and we are raised as humans to be nice and not say the mean things, or if you're American, sandwich, which I don't do, by the way. Good feedback, bad feedback, good feedback. No. If you truly believed that I cared about you and I'm trying to unlock your full potential, it becomes radical candor, not this negative thing. And you will give it freely because it's a gift. And then finally is, if you have the talent density and you have radical candor, why do you need to dummy-proof things? Why do you need approvals? Why do you need checks and balances? Why do you need reviews? Because what do you do when you want to refine your idea? You talk to the person that you trust, right? You go to a friend, you go to a colleague, you do a crit because you want to make the thing better. So in a world where people will do that themselves, I don't need to make that a process. And so Netflix is very intentional about this culture. A few things that you will see that were on the previous slide, still here. You will be in meetings and people will say, freedom and responsibility when you ask for permission, like F&R. Do what's right for Netflix. Context, not control, is one that stays. But as Netflix evolves, quarterly business reviews, team meetings, you are given the culture map, which is this phenomenal book, to read when you join the company. It's something you can join a course on. It's discussed, it's used in the lexicon, it is constantly living and evolving. And so the impact of that is, it's not just a board with some fancy words that are the culture, it actually shows up in the company. There are no code reviews, because if you're an engineer and you're going to land code, and you think that code is going to break something, maybe get someone to review it. We don't have to make it a process. If you land the code and something breaks, the system is designed to roll it back automatically. We actually would do things at Netflix like test and stress test the systems to allow for these kinds of risks. And when the risks happen and you fail, you see that as a beautiful moment because you get to sunlight it. And sunlighting means celebrating that learning and making sure other people learn from your mistakes. So it's seen as an opportunity and not this issue. And it's other things. There were no vacation limits, but there were really no vacation limits. Like, people actually would go out of the office for a month or two. Do what's right for Netflix. No bonuses, no performance reviews. You wanted to promote someone, you had a discussion, you went into Workday, you clicked a button, and it was done. Didn't happen once a year or multiple times a year. You did it when the person was ready. No approvals, and most importantly at the bottom, no fear of risks. So let's bring it to the product. 2015, then Chief Product Officer Neil Hunt went publicly to the world and said, Netflix will never do downloads. Sounds a bit familiar to the Uber Cash story. And the reason was, everyone has the internet. I'm just going to click a button, it will stream. But that's not what happens in a lot of places. I mean, this room being the perfect example, the data's not working here, right? And so this PM, very junior PM, Zach basically went to the VP of product and said, I disagree. And freedom and responsibility, context not control, do what's right for Netflix. He wrote a memo, which is how Netflix does a lot of debate. You write your memo, you put some what we call discussion questions, and you debate. And ultimately, if you decide, I don't care what you're saying, and I think this is the right thing, you go ahead and do it and you take that risk. Freedom and responsibility, F&R. And within a couple of months, they did a bunch of studies, found that in a lot of markets, Germany as an example, big houses, concrete buildings, in the basement, data doesn't work, that this ideology that developed countries have stable internet was actually not true. Launched Netflix downloads, and for those who use Netflix, how many people have downloaded on Netflix? Exactly. Literally more people than have read the book. And this is exactly the thing. Great ideas cannot be stopped by hierarchy. So how does this culture empower you? So the essence of Netflix is this constant conversation, the intentionality of the culture, the fact that it's not on a board, it's constantly discussed. Google. I celebrated my 180th day 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to be very humble in what I say about Google, because I've not been here that long. But there is this story that some of you might have heard. I told you I'm a storyteller, so I'm always telling stories. These two young fish are swimming, and they run into an older fish. And the older fish says, hey boys, how's the water? And then the young fish keeps swimming away, and then one of them turns to the other and goes, what the hell is water? If I could summarize Google's culture, this is exactly how it is. There is no board with a list of things or cultural values that are written out. There's just this one notion of respect. And so when you have the right people, the right culture, the right values, you really can accomplish great things. If you think about the amount of Google products you probably open in a day, it's one of those companies, I think, when we think about the dents that have been made in the universe, this is right up there. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go to YouTube and help people tell stories at scale. Google 2002, there was one single thing, don't be evil. Didn't really scale. Evolved intentionally to respect the user, respect the opportunity, respect each other. Now, respect means many things. In my culture, respect means you don't talk to your elders, right? In America, that might be something different. In Japan, maybe you don't say no. So it does require distilling what respect means. And so there is a distillation of that respect. But really and truly, I think what the important story here is, Google is that example of culture at scale. The size of Google is about, if you count including external staff, it's about the size of the city of Amsterdam. I don't know what Zurich is, probably about the same too. But big city. And if you're a Londoner or you're a New Yorker or in Zurich or Stockholm, you know that in that city there are microcultures. There are the sort of edgy hipsters, there's the super posh districts, there's the more sort of diverse district, let's just go with that. And that is exactly what you see at Google. It's like a big city with lots of microcultures. And Googlers will tell you when people change projects, which is the fancy way for changing jobs within the company. Very easy. When people change products, they will actually ask, how's the culture? Some teams within Google will be very engineering driven. You probably all hear Google's an engineering driven culture. Not true. It's not all over the place. There are some teams that are very product driven. There are some teams that are very UX driven. And there are some teams that it's all about data science and research. Some teams will be about launching things very quickly. I was speaking to Tilka earlier on the assistant team. They could just go quick and launch things. But on search, you maybe have heard about this famous story about multiple blue colors on search. It's true. There is a lot of process and rigor that goes into making those changes, especially when changing the color of blue impacts billions of dollars. And at YouTube, our culture is this collection of the creativity, the humanness of creators and storytelling and giving everyone a voice. And so the product that we've created in the last 180 days was a culture within the creator org. We are the org that help people tell their stories. And we wanted to make sure that the way we show up allows us to bring that vision to life. And so we went in a room, sat together, broke up into parts. I'm giving you the workshop notes, by the way, for how to create your culture. And everyone wrote down what the top things they would want, the values they would want to be known for. We collected them, and this, what you see on the slide, are the top things that came up. And this is the creator's culture within YouTube's culture, which is within Google's culture. And so as you scale, I always say, with product teams, with my team, the magic happens in the confluence of our differences. And I think this is what you see at Google. And so we've talked about 3 cultures. Startup culture, very early days, hundreds of employees when I joined Uber. We've talked about how that monolithic culture had to evolve. We've talked about culture at Netflix, where it was intentional and evolving. And we've talked about Google, where it evolved, has been intentional, even though it's not explicitly spoken about, Googliness, and how you scale that culture. It becomes more flexible, more malleable, right? More micro. And so I want to leave you with that. Culture is ever evolving. Culture is something where we need to be intentional to allow it to be understood. And culture, as it scales, becomes about microcultures. So all of you are probably in one stage of a business that is somewhere mapped to one of these. And the question I want to keep having you ask yourself is, how does this culture empower me? Thank you. Do I stay there?
Thank you so much, Avi. It's amazing to hear you speak. I always love learning from you and continuing on that journey. What we actually have is we have an Ask Me Anything with Avi over at Papiersal in the next session, okay? So hold your Q&A right here, but if you'd like to learn more from her, ask her direct questions, we're gonna head over there, and in the next session, we have one-on-one time with Avi to continue the discussion. So once more, a big round of applause for Avi Atawodi.